Overlord Volume 2 The Dark Warrior. After realizing in the previous volume that Ainz is absurdly overpowered compared to the humans of this world, he decides to cosplay as a warrior and become an adventurer. Why cosplay? Because he doesn't actually have the skills of a warrior, and instead he does the move feared by gamers all around the world: stat checking. My skills are lacking? Doesn't matter. My stat numbers are bigger and therefore I win. Unga boonga, I'm so strong. This volume has a little bit of everything: world building, revenge, romance, comedy, and even a mighty steed that functionally serves as a pet. So let's get right into it, starting off as usual with the illustrations. I love this cover, and that's not saying much because I like all of the Overlord covers, they're all very good, but even among the bangers, this one is one of my favorites. The way the cover is composed is just so gory, and it really highlights the two main characters. Your eyes are immediately drawn towards Momon and later Narberal, who are looking heroic and imposing in the middle of this gruesome graveyard. The fact that Sobin's covers are so busy actually works in its favor here, because the cover has the horde of zombies that sort of just blends in the background to create this spooky atmosphere in which the protagonists shine even more. Everyone looks cool, and I love the way the graveyard is depicted with all the gore and the tombs and the creepy lights. This cover is just so good. To me, one of my favorite in the entire series. On the foldable pages we have a close-up of Momon versus Clementine, and I'm such a fanboy of these close-ups of the characters looking at each other that I absolutely love this. As a side note, some of these images depict events in the book and sometimes they have lines of dialogue. This one reads "Clementine doesn't lose," and just by looking at the image after the last volume, you know she's about to get squashed. You just don't know that she's going to get squashed in the literal sense. And on the other side you have a very wholesome image with the crew plus the Swords of Darkness. I really like the warmer tones on this one. It's a great contrast with the very dark vibe of this book. And as a special treat we also have these 2 pages full in color depicting the skeletal dragons and of course Narberal looking arrogant and absolutely disgusted with her opponent, which I know leaves some of you freaks extremely aroused, so let's try to keep it down. Now, as for the characters, we have a slight dynamic shift for our main character in which he is now pretending to be the warrior Momon, and it makes sense with what we saw in the previous volume, and also creates this very peculiar dynamic in which our main character is a human pretending to be Ainz, pretending to be Momon, so there's various layers of role-playing here. Ainz has now discovered that the humans stand probably no chance against him, at least from what he has seen, and so leaving Nazarick is not as risky as he once thought. And like I said in the previous video, Ainz is, despite being an overlord, very player-minded. He likes to take the initiative and go out himself. He wants to know more about the human peasants. What better way than to live among them? His direct involvement also works on many levels, as he's the best suited person in Nazarick by far to play the role of Momon. As we've seen, most NPCs in Nazarick have a unhideable disdain for humans, and even the ones that don't do not quite grasp human nature like Ainz, the former human, can. And part of the enjoyment of this volume is to get Ainz's inner thoughts surrounding the information that he picks up throughout the volume. As a side note, I read in the Overlord wiki that in the web novel, Narberal is the one who poses as Momon, which I'm not going to judge something I didn't read, of course, that would be silly, but I like the way it's done here, and to me they could perhaps lean more into the comedy and use another NPC as Momon, but to me Ainz is the perfect man for the job and I really like the way it's done here. And speaking of our main character, one thing to note here is that this volume really starts hammering down the point that Ainz may do good things if they align with the interests of Nazarick, but he's not a good guy. And yes, turns out that the skeletal overlord is a baddie. Shocking. In Volume 1, the members of Ainz Zulugon, especially Momonga, were humanized by their real-life counterparts, and because the game elements were so present on that volume, you think of Nazarick as more of an evil role-playing guild and not necessarily an evil organization. Momonga explained how in his new fleshless body, his mental state was also having a bit of a switch, but in the previous volume he really didn't do anything that was morally reprehensible. Sure, he didn't revive anyone at Carne Village, but one could argue that there were still a lot of things that he didn't know and that it could be riskier to draw attention to the village, as he also mentioned. In Volume 1, Ainz wasn't so much a villain, he was more of an anti-hero. He didn't go out of his way to help everybody as much as he could, but be it in the kindness in his non-existent heart or nostalgia for his guild members, he did help Carne Village when he didn't need to. He also forbade the members of Nazarick to use the remains of the villagers for experiments, so you could see that even if it's a bit flimsy, Ainz has his own moral code. Here in Volume 2, things get a bit different, or should I say things start becoming clearer. He's not a villain in the sense that he goes out of his way to do evil things, but he definitely has no problems in making people suffer if that advances Nazarick's interests. The main example of this is the unreasonable deal that Ainz gives to Lizzie.
I see, and you're prepared to compensate me?
How much will it take?
Everything.
What?
I'll take everything you have.
Yeah, this comes across as extremely exploitative because he has all the leverage and he knows that she can't say no, and he takes full advantage of that. And the fact that he was willing to sacrifice Nfirea or let a horde of zombies take over Irantel really proves to the reader that he's not the usual goody two-shoes isekai protagonist. He's the real deal. He is Papa Bones. The reader also builds up a certain emotional connection to the Swords of Darkness, so it can be a bit shocking when Ainz doesn't revive them, as one would expect him to. He weighs the pros and the cons, and he just thinks there's not enough upside, and we can see that he's truly not playing around in this volume. We see some examples of emotion mainly when talking about his guildmates, but we can see in this volume that Ainz is slowly becoming the evil overlord that the NPCs think that he is. In this book, Ainz also shares a lot of page time with Narberal, who accompanies him on his journey undercover as Nabe. Ainz quickly realizes that she was not the ideal choice for this role, as she makes her disdain for humans very obvious, but that is its own source of comedy and those scenes can be very funny. Nabe doesn't speak much around the other human characters, and so when she comes up with her venomous replies, they always get a chuckle out of me because they're well timed and few, they don't wear out the joke. If someone says the worst a woman can say is no, just remember this exchange. Will you go out with me? Shut up, you slug. Don't speak to me again until you know your place, or I'll rip out your tongue. Ouch. Yeah, Narberal as a secondary protagonist overall, she's serviceable, I would say. She's not as entertaining as the Floor Guardians, she's not as enthusiastic as Albedo, or as insane as Demiurge, who by the way shows us what an insane freak he is in this volume. But even if she doesn't speak much, her cold personality is a nice contrast to most of the human characters and also to Ainz, who's clueless trying to figure out how this world works. Narberal really shines when she's being mean to somebody, which is most of the time, and there is however a moment when this goes a little bit too far, and to me that's in the climax against Khajiit. In terms of the overall scale of things, I love the climax, I love Narberal versus the double skeletal dragons, that's just the type of fantasy awesomeness I'm here for. However, the dialogue in that scene can be a bit rough.
So you're not just an idiot, you're an idiot who can use tier 3 magic. An idiot? A human mite like you dares to call me an idiot? What's wrong with calling the fool interfering with my plan an idiot?
Yeah, what makes Narberal's dialogue fun is someone being nice to her and her being nasty and rude back. When you have two characters essentially trading kindergarten insults like, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, it becomes a little bit ridiculous. I like the idea of the big bad necromancer that thinks he's hot stuff, not knowing that Narberal works for the big daddy of necromancy himself, and I like the stakes of the fight. The author almost manages to fool the reader into thinking that Narberal is going to lose. However, the dialogue for this scene is just not it, and maybe it's a translation issue, I don't know. Fortunately, Khajiit is not the only villain in this book, because the main villain, you can argue, is Clementine, and I love her. She's the perfect mix of absolute psycho, evil, and confident in her skills, and that makes her defeat so satisfying. She's built up throughout the book as this evil person that just does as she pleases because she can, and then she faces this big muscly dude with no technique just swinging big swords around. And the setup is perfect. She's sure she can win, she's faster, more skilled, she even has her own little catchphrase, Clementine doesn't lose. And then she gets humbled and gets a tender, sweet hug so she never forgets who her true daddy is. And you know, Ainz could have just finished this in 1 second, but there is a flicker of emotion in him, and revenge is just so sweet. The scene with Narberal one-shotting the skeletal dragons is awesome and cool, but the scene with Ainz and Clementine is just gruesome and gory and the type of descriptive train wreck that you just can't look away from. I love the climax fights in this book. I think they are both excellent in their own way. I do think Khajiit is a weak villain, but I think that Clementine more than makes up for him. In terms of secondary characters, I also think it's worth to highlight Nfirea, the metaphorical damsel in distress that is saved by the noble knight. I like Nfirea as a character. He's very resourceful and smart, which immediately makes him stand out among all the other human characters. We see his rationale piecing up the various clues together to discover that Momon is Ainz, and including a slip-up from Nabe where she mentions Albedo, and it feels deserved. So many times in these stories we have these characters that have these 9,000 IQ moments, overly convenient plot moments just to show that they're smart, whereas here Nfirea truly feels smart in an organic way. Nfirea's talent is also an incredible setup, which I hope one day gets a major payoff because he can use any magic item, presumably also the items from Yggdrasil, which means that one day he can be Nazarik's biggest ally or biggest enemy. His personality is a bit dorky. The romance with Henry feels like a weird, funny side joke that the author added into the story, but I like it, it's fun. And I love seeing in fantasy these characters that are specialists at a certain craft, especially because for humans, you know that combat-wise they will probably never really match up to the members of Nazarik, so I like seeing Nfirea as the potion maker. It makes him useful in his own way. Ainz does not let Nfirea join Nazarik because he is a human and Nazarik only accepts non-humans in what is a very interesting exchange between the two characters, but fortunately or unfortunately for him, he gains a new non-human member, or should I say a pet. The giant hamster named Hamsuke, and the entire running gag surrounding him is just so goofy that it made me laugh. They keep building up the wise king of the forest as this regal beast, and turns out it's just a giant fat hamster with a tail that goes boink, so yeah, it was funny. The best part is that Ainz is the only one who sees him for what he is, presumably because he has a human sensibility and is used to seeing hamsters as these tiny little things, whereas everyone else just looks at him as this impressive beast. Even Narberal, that was the funniest thing, she does not roast him like she does everyone else. The visual of the Dark Warrior Momon riding this fluffy beast is just so funny, and Ainz in the previous volume said that he was a collector, and now he is truly becoming a Pokemon master. Gotta catch them all. Overall, Volume 2 is a great follow-up to Volume 1. It manages to expand the world building and introduce more characters while giving the readers an even better climax than the previous volume. It also marks a significant tone shift in the story, where it is without beyond any doubts for the reader that Ainz is not a saint, he's a force of nature, and he will do what he thinks is best for Nazarik. Momon as an adventurer is less fun than the Elder Leech Overlord going around blasting spells at people, but it's offset by the amusement of him pretending to be a warrior, so it kinda evens out. Good volume, banger cover, peak one-sided fights, and I have to say this volume ends with what is perhaps one of the best cliffhangers I have ever seen. We have established by this point that the humans are likely no threat to Nazarik, but now the enemy comes from within. Shaltir has rebelled. This is a shocking last few lines of dialogue that leaves the reader ecstatic to just pick up Volume 3, which I will be covering in a future video. As for now, what did you think of Volume 2? Leave it in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and all the good stuff. Ciao!